Welcome to this episode of The Wolf and the Shepherd. Today we have returning guest Randell Stroud. Randell, so great that you could join us today. We really appreciate you rejoining the podcast. So great to see you.
It's a pleasure to be back. A lot of interesting topics to dissect today.
Yeah, Randell, the last time we spoke, we were debating naming the podcast The Most Interesting Man in the World because you've got your fingers in a lot of pies and it seems like you need more fingers because you have a lot of pies. What are you up to at the moment? What's your main kind of focus?
Well, I do come from a legal background. And like I said, in my original appearance here, really into martial arts and fitness, still into that. And getting into that, like I said, dealing with bullies and stuff growing up, I've always had this very strong sense of just fighting back and not being passive against things. And that ultimately led me getting into, paralegal work and fighting against the quote unquote evils of the world, through pen and paper. But that got a little bit methodical to me, whereas I would be going to these court cases and someone, or perhaps a corporation, a company, would be clearly guilty, but they would get off on it based on some, civil procedure code or some kind of, technicality. And it was really cool sort of breaking down the matrix, if you will, because that's what it feels like the court system is sometimes, is sort of like hacking the mainframe of society that sort of controls everything. But I sort of got frustrated with a lot of things in the court system. I mean, we could do a whole podcast just talking about, finances and where money is going and who it's going to. But I've always just been concerned with the truth. And that is sort of what eased me out of, not totally, but sort of transitioned me into private investigation work, where it's like, hey, here's the truth. And it is what it is, regardless of what the law says. And then you guys can have fun with it. So I've been focusing more on doing investigative work. And whenever you say the word private investigator, most people think of, oh, cheaters, right? We're going to go find out if, your husband or your girlfriend is cheating on you. And that is a big sector in the private investigator sector or industry. But we have to consider that detectives for law enforcement, their caseload is huge because they're responsible for everyone. It's a public service. And a lot of times they spend between, I want to say 48 to 72 hours really hitting that case hard. And if they don't find any, very pertinent information or tips, it gets recycled to the bottom of the pile. And then once every few weeks or every couple of months, it comes back up and they take another look at it, try to get some more details. But then after a couple of years, it can get buried so deep under all of these cases that people get desperate and they come to private investigators, and they're like, hey, I'm looking for, a missing child. And the police just aren't getting back to me. Or perhaps it's a business owner and they're like, hey, I think one of my employees is stealing something. And the police just aren't investigating it heavily, and we want this matter expedited. So they go to private investigators who can focus purely on the problem at hand, and they don't have all this bureaucracy to sort of distract them. And our caseloads are much lower, so we can put a lot more energy into it. And I've been doing that more heavily for about the past 2.5 years, and I've learned a lot, just a lot. Sociology, psychology, just sort of analyzing people, and it's been really fun and fascinating.
Yeah, it's kind of ironic that you talk about this, first 48 to 72 hours, right? Almost sounds like the way everyone actually reacts to like social media. They have a short attention span. So you're almost saying, hey, law enforcement, they have this short attention span as far as, hey, we got to react to this immediately. If we can't get something going, we got something coming behind that. We got to react to that. Hopefully we can solve that. We can save that. We can do whatever. But in your line of work, in private investigation, you'll go for the long game.
Well, it's really complicated because it's not just short attention spans, but it's also resources. Because if someone goes to a detective and they say, hey, someone stole my car, well, that police department has certain budgetary concerns. They have, overtime hours and labor laws and all these sort of regulations and restrictions. And then plus, they're serving society. Like, I live in Tennessee right now, and I think there's like 11.5 or 12 million people that live in the state, something like that. And I live in Davidson County, and there's around, I want to say, like close to 700,000 people that live here. That's a lot of people, ringing your phone. Now, not every single one of those people, but let's just say 10,000 out of 700,000 people are victims of crimes. They're calling, and those police departments have to respond to that. And the longer they have to stay on these cases, the more they have to get paid. And it's just the sheer volume. But whenever you hire a private investigator, you can say, hey, here's $5,000, or here's $100. What can you do for me? And that person, is just focusing on your case, maybe, a couple of others. But as long as that person is giving you some sort of compensation, it can just keep going. And they're honed in on that. So that's a big problem as well. But as far as just crime in and of itself, it's not just crime. Yes, there are social issues that people call in about, is my husband cheating and all these kind of things. But it's just like everything else, it's multifaceted.
Now, is most of your work at the moment kind of civil type stuff in the PI side, as opposed to kind of assisting with criminal investigations? Because when I lived in England, I did some private investigative work for a while, and I was working on a case to do with foster homes. I can't really tell you what it was, just
Right.
other than
Pizza delivery doesn't count.
no, it wasn't pizza delivery, but we got a lot of evidence which was not able to be used in court, and it proved beyond doubt that these people were guilty of some pretty serious crimes, but the court wouldn't accept it because of the manner in which it was collected.
Right. Pineapple
Exactly.
on pizza.
But, thankfully there were other people who took care of the problem because it was a bit of a nasty issue.
Pineapple on pizza.
No, basically adults raping kids.
I'd rather talk about pineapple on pizza than that.
Yeah, I'm sure.
That's pretty heavy.
So do you find it kind of frustrating that some of the stuff you find, really legally you can't use? It might lead you to a path. You might be able to push somebody to a certain path or summary, but you've got something and you just know a judge won't accept it.
Yeah, and that goes back to me, talking about being a paralegal. If anybody doesn't know what a paralegal is, it's basically the person that does most of the work and the lawyer takes credit for it. It's a little joke that I like to say, but it's kind of true. The paralegals are very knowledgeable because they're doing all the grunt work, and oftentimes the lawyer, the only time that lawyers really have to do like serious work is whenever they're making oral arguments. But to get back to your question, it can be frustrating, especially if you know that someone's 100% guilty and you're like, I want to see this guy go down, and you have this clear truth, but then that person has a good lawyer, and like you said, because of some technicality, maybe the evidence wasn't gathered according to the civil procedures, or maybe a document was misspelled and it was challenged and it was thrown out, and all that kind of jargon. But what I've tried to do is, whenever I'm collecting evidence and I'm doing surveillance or cyber investigations, whatever it is once I have that information and I send it off and hand it off, I try to just like delete my emotional attachment to that. And I am kind of a religious guy. I believe in God. And whenever I collect this information, oftentimes I'll pray and I'll just say, God, whatever happens with this information, let it be done with your will. And I try to, divorce my attachment to that and then just move on. Did I lose you in the audio?
No,
No,
not at all. So now we were just kind of thinking about this. You kind of explained a paralegal there, but I think before we go any farther, let's explain what a private investigator is, how you become a private investigator. Because I think about my dad watching the show Mike Hammer, and he was a PI and all this, or you get Magnum PI and you get all this, and so everybody gets this Hollywood version in their head of what a private investigator is. So let's walk through it before we go any farther, how you become a private investigator and exactly what a private investigator does.
Well, it's a very interesting career field. And just like with being a paralegal, people ask, how much does it pay? Well, it depends on, where you're working. Like, just like being a paralegal, being a corporate paralegal, they can make $100,000 a year. Whereas if you're a bankruptcy paralegal, it's going to, pay less. Same thing with private investigations. It depends on what kind of stuff that you're doing. Like, I think that the best paid gig that I've had doing private investigations was actually working for banks and helping to track down vehicles that people had stopped paying on and were basically hiding them, and the banks were trying to recover their property. But as far as becoming a private investigator, it's dependent state by state, even sometimes city by city, because we do live in the United States. We have a very complicated legal system. We have, of course, federal law, which covers the entire United States. And then, of course, we have state law, and then we have municipalities. But generally, you do need some sort of qualifications to be a private investigator. There's only a few places in the United States. I think there's a couple of jurisdictions in Alaska, I want to say Mississippi, and a handful of other places where you don't need any license, whatsoever. And you can go apply and be a private investigator for, a company. But most of the time, you need to have a license. And in order to get that license, you have to, of course, work for a company that's bonded and has all those credentials and everything. But in order to take the test to get that that license to work independently, you'll have to take an exam. And you also, in some jurisdictions, you have to have credentials. Typically, it is a bachelor's degree, primarily in criminal justice, or you've got to have at least 2 years of working experience in a related field that requires investigative skills. That could be being a paralegal in certain aspects. It could be debt collection, anything that requires you to do any sort of investigative work, and you can use that work experience in place of having that educational experience. And just like with being a lawyer or a nurse or anything else, you have sort of these probationary periods. You have different levels, being an apprentice, working for a company, being independent. I mean, it can go in all kinds of directions, and it's a very interesting career field because it can't be totally automated. So I think it is a safe industry to be in, even though certain aspects, especially cyber investigations, are being automated. But until we get robots,
how can it be automated?
Well, like cyber investigations, for example, a lot of companies have things that can track people's social medias. There's certain programs and things out there that just scan people's information. A good example, there are repossession companies that have these vehicles, these scout vehicles, I call them. They drive around and they have these sort of scanners that are on the top of their vehicles that send out, lasers and just scan license plates. And if one of these vehicles that they're looking to repossess, they scan that license plate and that information feeds back into the system, it sends a message to one of these repossession companies. Hey, we found our guy. He's here. Send the tow truck. And everything's just automated. And this guy's just driving around, and he's not even typing in anything or doing anything. He's just literally driving, and these lasers are just scanning everybody's license plates, and information is just freely being sent, and alerts are happening. And this guy's just driving. And once self-driving vehicles become a norm, then that guy's job becomes obsolete.
Yeah. Now, in England, you didn't need any qualifications whatsoever. So you'd get a few ex-policemen who would go into private investigating, which...
Like retired cops.
Yeah, which wasn't the best for England because, cops over there, they don't undergo exactly a great depth of criminology and investigative techniques. It's not all like Scotland Yard.
They have to wear that goofy hat.
Yeah, the black tit, on their head, yeah.
Right.
But in the United States,
one of those, by the way.
In the United States.
Oh, why aren't you wearing that hat? Well, maybe we should have prefaced this.
I think we've just explained it exactly why you shouldn't be wearing it.
Oh, I think he just ran up.
Look at that.
Now do I look more like a...
No,
we weren't talking about gangsters, mate.
I need a cigar. Where's my cigar at?
Yeah, I think you've got the wrong end of the stick there. We're not talking about 1920s New York,
like the giant hat.
Yeah, right? I know the
little bobby.
Yeah, I know what you mean.
Oh, okay. I know what
no, not that. Yeah, no, that's your private investigator, 1920s Las Vegas type.
Hey there.
Gotta get there.
Where's the copper? Yeah.
Well, anyway, I was shitting on the English police being private investigators because they didn't seem to do a very good job of the policing. I remember once I was working at a company and we had a break-in over the weekend. And I had to get there early on Monday morning because I was responsible for examining what stock had been damaged, taken, whatever. And
polishing the hats.
Yeah, polishing the hats. And the boss got in, and we were sitting there waiting for the police to turn up, and 3 policemen turned up. Well, 2 policemen, 1 policewoman turned up about 45 minutes late after they said they were going to get there. And we showed them where the break-in had occurred, and whoever had burgled the building, the warehouse, whatever, had broken a window and went in through. So I stood there, and this policewoman was kind of like writing in this little notebook on this window, and I saw she was drawing a diagram and was drawing on the diagram where the window had been broken. And I thought, hold on a moment, this is 1996? Pretty sure cameras have been invented, this rather than your kind of sketch that you're doing by hand here. And she did that, and she walked away, and I said, you gonna get any fingerprints off the glass at all? And she looked at me, she goes, you can't get fingerprints off glass. And so I opened the door, which was about, I don't know, maybe about 5-6 feet away from where she was standing, and shouted to my boss and said, don't bother coming out from the back. They've sent Sherlock Holmes. The case is solved. So, no, I didn't have great experience with the police or private investigators in England. They weren't really that good. But a lot of ex-law enforcement officials in the United States become private investigators because I've seen... sometimes it's kind of saturated a little bit. If you type in anything, if you're trying to look up background on somebody, if you're hiring an employee, and it comes up with about 20 ads of, look up anybody's court records. After that, that's when all the private investigator ads start kicking in. And like it takes you to about the 4th page of Google before you can actually get a free site where you can look up stuff for public records.
Oh, we don't go that far though.
No, we don't actually. First page of Google, if you can't find it there, it doesn't exist. It doesn't exist.
Exactly.
So, I mean, is the private investigative sector kind of saturated with kind of ex-cops and stuff, or are the people just like you who just have a good legal background, a good understanding of the process, and just think, this is something I can do?
I think yes and no. Maybe in the past it was, but nowadays a lot of people are going directly into private investigations and skipping working directly for law enforcement because it does offer you more flexibility in some ways because, it can lead towards you opening your own business and being self-employed. You can't be a self-employed police officer for the state. not unless you become like an off-duty security guard or something like that. But when you're a private investigator, you have more control if you decide to go and work for yourself. So when you go on Google and you type in, private investigator, and you see all these kind of companies come up, yes, I think a lot of those are saturated with ex-military, ex-police, but I'm talking about people who are employed to work for corporations and companies. There's all kinds of people that come from all kinds of backgrounds, and that's mainly what I've done is either have been a direct employee or subcontracted, for actual companies. And there's a big umbrella of investigations. So there are actually people that's being hired out there to do financial investigations for a corporation. I mean, can you imagine, let's say like Amazon, for example, it's the largest corporation in the United States, or really in the world. If you were to type in private investigator job, Amazon, I mean, a lot would come up, because they have so many records that they have to look through. They have so many people, payroll, people ordering supplies. So financial crimes are on the rise because everything now is about information. It reminds me of that guy, Alex Jones, InfoWars, that there's a war on your mind and information, but everything, there's an information war that's constantly happening, a data war. So cyber investigations and financial investigations are setting to outpace people that are looking to get into this field, who think that they're going to go chase down some bad guy, or dusting for fingerprints and trying to figure out, who committed this arson against this building. But criminals are getting smarter as well. And they're like, hey, I don't have to get dirty and break in somebody's house. I can break into this, mainframe of a website, and I can drain someone's bank account, so everything's going into the digital world. So yeah. Digital and cyber investigations, if you're wanting to make money, like those are the sectors to go into. And aside from that, I think that doing surveillance work, trying to figure out if someone's cheating, especially like in family law cases, someone that's fighting for custody over a child, private investigators still, heavily needed there. But it's just like with any other industry. You've got to keep up with the trends and the different areas of practice that are in demand. So you got to diversify your skill set.
Well, at least the internet's pretty helpful. I mean, like on Amazon, if you put into your cart, if you're like, okay, I would like 2 bags of fertilizer, I would like 6 metal tubes, it will come up with that helpful little dialogue. It looks like you're trying to build a pipe bomb.
Right. Would you also like an ignition device?
Yeah. So, I mean, it's pretty helpful. Now, you did bring up that, a lot of crimes now, are online. A lot of financial crimes especially tend to take place on the internet as opposed to in the real world. I mean, in some ways, you need to be a bit of a mug to risk, going into a situation with guns with a good chance of getting shot to try and get like $10,000, when with a little bit of education, a little bit of patience, and a little bit of direct targeting online, you can make much more money in a criminal fashion and have very little chance to get caught. So I think you do have 2 different types of criminal now. I think a lot of people are seeing it's a lot easier to scam somebody in the virtual world than it is in the real world. Everybody has access to, horror stories and hints and tips to keep yourself safe, which apply to the real world. But all the ones online all seem to be about, make sure you don't get tracked by cookies, don't sign up for this because you'll get a bunch of spam mail. But a lot of the advice they give about protecting your financial information is pretty crap and pretty out of date. I mean, Google Chrome, for instance, I can hack, that browser and drag out everybody's personal information for credit card info and everything they've ever entered in there within about 10 minutes. I mean, it's not safe, but it protects you against 99.99999% of people.
It's safer.
Yeah, safer. So how do you go about tracking cybercrime when somebody's half decent at covering their tracks?
It's really difficult, especially with cryptocurrency. That is, I think, going to be the face of of investigations in the future, because cryptocurrency is, still quite new. And there's actually a scam that's very popular going around right now. It's called dusting, where these people create these bogus cryptocurrencies that, don't really have any value. And as long as someone has your wallet address, which is very easy to get, if you go on YouTube or even people that have podcasts, they're like, hey, if you want to donate to our podcast and support us, here's our crypto wallet address and donate cryptocurrencies to us.
Wait, stop. We don't have one of those.
No.
Yeah,
For good reason.
we need to do that.
Well, I think it's important to kind of point out right there, Randall, and you might be getting onto that point.
No, I'm worried more about the fact that there are people that will actually send us cryptocurrency
I don't know about
for
us.
free.
I think they send it to people who provide,
Randall's
a valuable service, which cuts us out of the
Well, that's true,
equation.
but Randall's sitting here saying, hey, there's podcasts out here that say, hey, here's our wallet address, give us money.
Yeah,
and apparently people are doing this.
Yeah, those are probably the good podcasts.
I don't know. Maybe Randall needs to, be in charge of that and get us some free cryptocurrency.
All right. But how that method you're talking about works, Randall, is that the alternate crypto they create is normally like an Ethereum Deviant or something they've put on layer 2. And it's very easy to create a cryptocurrency, but you also have to create your own wallet, your own blockchain for that. And what happens is these people who create these fake coins actually create these fake wallets as well. Because a regular, say, Bitcoin address, it doesn't matter if I give you my Bitcoin address, there's nothing you can do about it. You can go and see on the ledger all the transactions, but you can't see exactly source and destination, but you can see the transactions I've made. But with these fake coins, it's the fake wallets which are the issues. It's not like if you have a fake coin, somebody's going to get into your Coinbase account, because Coinbase won't float that fake coin on their thing, or not even on the Coinbase wallet, which I think has probably hundreds of different coins. You have to go through certain criteria to have a coin listed on those exchanges. So these new crappy coins, and especially there's been a lot of offshoots of Dogecoin and Shiba.
Hey, don't knock Shiba.
Don't knock Shiba.
Don't knock Shiba.
Shitty little Japanese dog.
No, I like the Shiba coin.
So I mean, I do think it is important to differentiate. If somebody has your Bitcoin address or Ethereum address, as long as it's in a trusted exchange like Binance or Coinbase, then it's pretty much safe unless you do something stupid. The big problem with the fake crypto is the fake wallets.
Well, this was the next point I was going to get to, is that, if someone has your wallet address, anybody can, send you their crypto. And somebody tried to actually use this dusting scam against me recently, where I looked into my Coinbase wallet and there were all these coins that I had never purchased and never got. And I was like, wow, someone must really love me. They're sending me all this, free crypto. But then, just do a quick Google search, like, what is this token? What immediately all these Reddit forums come up. What was one of them? I think it's called like Mantis or something like that. As soon as you use that token and try to cash it out or trade it, then boom, they're able to use certain methods and hack into your wallet and basically clear you out. So if you recognize any sort of crypto in your wallet that you've never seen or that you don't trust, like always second guess it. And I'm sort of new to the crypto world, but I've also been looking into scams with NFTs as well. The digital art, non-fungible tokens. But, a lot of people are using crypto and NFT to do money laundering. It's like, hey, we got $100,000 in this drug money. Well, let's just put it into an NFT and it gets caught up that way. So the government is starting to catch up, to these things, but it's a new market for investors and entrepreneurs. There's a lot of good about crypto. I'm not anti-crypto, but at the same time, with new technology comes new opportunities for criminals as well. And once we get into this metaverse, and then especially, and this is what really freaks me out, is like Neurolink, if you guys are familiar with that, Elon Musk is trying to put a computer chip and basically implant the internet inside of everyone's brain and this may be beyond our generations, hopefully, but I can definitely see in the future to where there's going to be people that are, hacking consciousness and jumping in and out of people's consciousness, and literally stealing their physical identities. But now I'm getting way out there into conspiracy theories, but it seems like all the conspiracy theories from 10, 20 years ago, they keep coming partially true. So maybe I shouldn't speak that into existence.
Well, you talk about like conspiracy theory behind that. I remember the contest between VHS and Beta, and you're too young probably to remember this, but there were two versions of tapes that were out there that you could watch video on. There was VHS and there was Beta. And
Betamax, right?
Yeah, Betamax. Beta was actually the better quality version, but it was a little more expensive to produce the tapes. And for years, news organizations and everything, they still used Beta, and because they knew when they recorded on Beta, when they broadcast that over the airwaves, the frame rates, the whatever it was, it looked better. But do you know, Randall, why VHS won the battle between VHS and Beta?
No idea.
Exactly. So the winner was pornography, because the pornography studios were able to put more videos out on VHS because it was cheaper. So they could distribute more material, more sales or whatever, because it was cheaper, and sell that cheaper. So that's why VHS won over Beta. And you talk about, this criminal whatever, and not that pornography is illegal by any means, but it's that nefarious thought of what actually drives whatever we're looking at as consumers that we actually purchase.
Exactly. And, that sort of, profit motive is something that people always question, or just motive in general. Like, I remember whenever 9/11 happened, I remember the first thing that came to my mind.
You were like 3 years old?
Oh, no, I was in high school when 9/11 happened.
Well, you're a young man.
He's a youthful looking man, right?
Yeah, I know he is. I mean, I hate even looking at him because he looks so much younger.
We've got it knocked down to 360p just to make ourselves feel better, actually.
Right.
Yeah.
Well, you can invite me back on for another episode, and we can talk all about health, because at one point in my life, I was studying naturopathy and sort of going down that area. I'm telling you, I've got like 50, lives trapped in this body. I'll only get one life, so that's why I've stuck my hands in so many things. But going back to my original point, whenever 9/11 happened, what I was thinking, what I imagine a lot of people were thinking is, why did they do this? Why did they attack us? And I actually wrote a book called "Why: The Greatest Question Ever Asked." And I really believe that question, why, is what, motivates us to get up every morning. I could ask you, why did you start this podcast? And I'm sure that you can give me a whole tale of what your motivations are. So motive is, if you're interested in motive, if you're interested in the why of things, then you can be a great private investigator. You can be a great inventor. You can basically change the world if you're obsessed with the energy that's behind why of things. And that's sort of what gets me going. Anytime that I see something, or even if someone's trying to be nice to me, I'm like, well, what's the motive behind this? And everyone's like that, and I'm not saying to be a paranoid person by and just think everything's out to get you, but a little bit of skepticism, healthy skepticism, can help, keep us alive. But at the same time, while we have that skepticism, we also want to back it up with facts and not get trapped in the, confirmation bias. And that's one big thing that I've learned doing this kind of work is it's taught me to not always trust stereotypes. And this may be controversial and it may, offend some people, but so be it. But all stereotypes are based in some truth. And the reason why we have stereotypes is, as organisms, we want to streamline things. We want to be able to make, quick judgments. If I'm walking down the street and I see some big guy with teardrop tattoos, I'm going to be a little bit, okay, I'm going to watch this guy because based on, experience, if someone has tattoos all over their face, it's probably indicative that they have some impulse control problems. And they don't like to think long term. And that's indicative that they're probably a lot more likely to, commit crimes, because in order to commit a crime, you probably have impulse control because you're thinking about short-term gain. But just because someone has teardrop tattoos doesn't always mean that they've committed crimes either. It does mean that they're a lot more likely, but not necessarily. So there's been all kinds of instances where, a guy is applying for, a high-level job, and he needs to be investigated. Look at his background. And I would say that the majority of the time, if all those little all those boxes are checked off, yes, he has a lot of tattoos, and he's had, these kind of problems. He's been divorced, 6 times and remarried. All these things are indicative of impulse control. And it usually does lead to finding something in their background that, yeah, maybe you shouldn't hire this guy, but not always. So there's nothing wrong with having sort of a stereotypical mind or making, blanket assessments, but always keep that nugget in the back of your mind that says, this person could be the exception and I'm going to give them a chance. Because there's been times where I've looked into guys, who maybe got into a fight, 20 years ago, maybe they were going through a phase in their life, and, and he's got neck tattoos and maybe a gold tooth, but he never got in trouble ever again. And he's basically a good guy. He turned it around and now he's stable. But then this other guy over here, he's a pastor of a church, and he checks all the boxes of being this great guy. You probably want him to, date your daughter one day. But then you start digging more and more and more. Oh, this guy changed his name back in 2011. Why is that? Oh, he got charged for, raping somebody. Oh, wait a second. He's actually not a great guy, even though he, has all these, things that make him look great. He's just better at hiding it. So we always have to sort of give people the benefit of the doubt. And if it's really bothering us, you got to do the research and dig deeper. And that's sort of my whole thing. Maybe I'm segueing here, is like in this whole, COVID and vaccine debate, is that whenever COVID first hit, everyone had basically one of two reactions. Is, oh my God, the world's ending. This is Ebola. And if I come into contact with it, I'm going to be dead. And then the other person was like, well, is it really that serious? I'm just going to live my life and just, and just pay attention and just see what happens and act accordingly.
Yeah. So, and you also talk about those visual concepts, right? I mean, I could say to you, well, I don't trust anybody that holds a pen in their hand and isn't writing anything at all, but waves this pen around and just, I'm like, why do you have this pen in your hand? Like, what are you trying to tell me?
I am writing something. See?
Okay. Okay. Just making sure.
But backtracking a little bit before we get on to COVID, Randell, you did mention about stereotypes. And I think for a lot of people, the movie Minority Report with Tom Cruise was a bit of a dystopian view of perhaps how predictive crime may go as AI gets more and more involved. But the fact of the matter is, right, since the early 70s, even if it was done manually, people would take profiles of people, and part of the training for, again, in investigative procedures is likelihood of somebody being a suspect, of being a criminal. And, you know, a lot of the time it's down to culture and background, which unfortunately gets so deeply tied in with race, it becomes a very sensitive topic to discuss. But with startling accuracy, even from the 70s, where the system was almost entirely manual, they were able to predict the likelihood of somebody committing a crime based upon their background, their relatives, and the more information they had on them, the more accurate they were able to ascertain whether this person was likely to commit a crime. And it had a very high percentage success rate. And they've continued with this, and there's various programs, short studies, some of them conducted by the military. And again, they have very, very high success rates. But the reason, obviously, against police departments rolling this type of thing out is this whole assumed prejudice that this is going to be prejudice against black people. It's going to, you know, target young males who have no criminal, you know, record whatsoever, but just because statistics say they're more likely to commit a crime, then they're going to be picked up, rather than, say, you know, a woman doing 65 in 30 in a school zone, which obviously you can't really preemptively predict, but the consequences of that might be death if you're doing 60 miles per hour in a school zone, right? But you can't predict that. But you might predict that, say, some young black teenager from Detroit may or may not try marijuana in his life and may at some point be in possession of marijuana. And that's like, okay, this might be something he has to go to court to, do some jail time, get a large fine. It's permanently on his record, but nobody was harmed. And that's what kind of gets me about some of these predictive kind of algorithms. It goes for easy targets with crimes which don't really destroy or cause society to decay, at least in individual instances. And yet the people who really get away with bad crap, it doesn't matter how much AI you have, they're always going to be untouchable because they control the people who control the AI.
Yeah, you know, there's a whole industry based around this, and it's called, you know, risk management. You know, it's for real estate, it's for all kinds of things. And there's nothing wrong with it in a lot of instances, but there obviously is, you know, chances for, you know, corruption and abuse of power. But we are all risk assessors. When you go on a date with someone for the first time, let's be honest, it kind of is like a job interview in some ways. You know, if you go on a date with a woman, no matter how beautiful she is, you know, if she's, you know, if she smoked through an entire pack of cigarettes throughout the date, you're like, she's a chain smoker. Well, it says that maybe her health isn't so good.
I'd also question my choice of restaurant, to be honest with you.
No, that's true. Yeah. And honestly, when you talk about this, I thought about something that I've seen recently on Facebook, right? So I want you to chime in here, Randall. What if you see this woman on Facebook, right? And they've got the filters and everything going on. And you say, this woman is absolutely beautiful. Then you go meet her and you realize she's not what it seems.
Yeah, that was my dating history for about 5 years before I got married, actually.
Well, yeah, but this was long before the filters, right? So now we have the social media filters, the picture filters, you know, and there's these women that they post these pictures and you say, this woman is absolutely beautiful. And you're almost afraid to meet her in real life because, you know, that's impossible.
I can't say I had any of those. I did meet some whose Facebook avatar was more realistic than the actual real photo they had on the profile, though.
That makes sense. But there are a lot of women that you look at and you say, it's impossible that you have put on this persona, right? That you're this beautiful, that you're so sweet and everything, but somehow you're divorced, you know, now you're newly single. It's like, if you were this great, why'd you get divorced?
That's a topic for another episode.
Oh, fair enough.
But Randall, so what Max was saying there is that, you know, along with AI, with the benefits it's brought with social media, it's also brought a lot of deception, especially with online dating being now the most popular way for people to meet and date, and obviously now get dumped as well. But as the metaverse comes in and Zuckerberg's evil kind of plan comes to fruition. You've seen the movie Ready Player One, right?
No.
It's basically about a kid who goes into the metaverse and he can be whoever he wants in there, have Matrix type powers within that metaverse. But the challenges within the metaverse are very similar to the challenges in real life, that without the benefit of insider information and without money or the coins you gain in the game, you still hit these glass ceilings. And I mean, it's very reflective of real life. And people think the metaverse will actually allow them to escape the constraints of real life. But instead, you put yourself in a system which has even more constraints. And it's even more frustrating because you can see some people flying, but you can't fly. Whereas in real life, you don't really have that kind of, oh, there's flying, I can't fly. But
you have the in-game ability to go ahead and, pay $25 and now you can fly.
So in terms of, and I wanted to ask you this earlier when you were saying, you never constrained yourself, you wanted to try all these different things. Do you think that people have a certain amount of, not religious speaking, but predestination that confines them to, even if they're very creative, they think, well, I can't ever be a creative person. I can't be an author. I can't do this. My parents both were blue collar workers, and, I feel the only thing I can do is go into this line of work. The metaverse is supposed to offer an escape from that, but I think there's probably a little bit more insidious stuff behind it in terms of, I think it will actually turn people more into that Matrix type, human battery fueling this metaverse, because, you create all these tasks, collect all this data in the metaverse, and all of a sudden you've got the best social studies research ever created, because you've got people who are living then somewhat of a normal life within the metaverse, as people have done playing The Sims for years. You basically replicate what you see in society, but try and improve upon it. So
you played The Sims differently than I did.
Oh, no, I probably played it the same way you did, yeah. But how do you see the metaverse playing out if maybe only 2 or 3 people in the whole world are basically going to control the entire environment and what goes on and the rules within it? Surely that's more dangerous than a true society with complete anarchy.
I mean, man, this topic can go in a million different directions. What's that old saying? Shit rolls downhill.
Mine kind of slides.
Well, it's because you're British.
It kind of runs slightly, like lava. Yeah.
But
mine goes uphill.
Everything.
No, it doesn't go uphill. I know that's your, way you think, but the British don't get that anymore.
Right. So. Sorry, Randall, go on, buddy.
What you were saying earlier about sort of predictive outcomes. We should do risk management on things, because it typically is, true for us, and we don't like to waste our time. But also, consistency also reveals intent. So like going back to the dating metaphor. Just because someone says, well, I've been divorced in the past. Yeah, that is a red flag that you want to explore, but it doesn't automatically mean something's wrong with them, because, like what Max was saying, if you're so beautiful and you're so great, then, why are you divorced? Well, it depends on the circumstance. Maybe she was a really nice person, but she got manipulated, she got lied to, and she, married someone, and then later on, he revealed, who he truly was. But it's all about consistency. So if she says, I've been married and divorced 6 times, then it's like, okay, well, there is a problem here. You either have some impulse control, or, you have some daddy issues, or all kinds of other problems going on, and you should, run away. But like for a kid, for example, he grows up with divorced parents, and he's in a bad neighborhood. He has all the demographics, going against him, and predictive assessment says that he's most likely, going to go in this direction in life. But there is something called post-traumatic growth. So whenever a traumatic thing happens in our life, neuroplasticity comes back, almost like a reset button. Like on the last episode that I was on here, I was talking about surviving that gun blast, the bullet that scraped the back of my head. Most people, I think around 87%, when something traumatic happens to them, their brain immediately goes to the negative, and their brain absorbs that experience, and it restructures itself, and they replay that scenario over and over in their head, and they become traumatized. But approximately 13% of people go through an opposite sort of phenomenon called post-traumatic growth, where they actually, their brain assesses the situation and says, well, what was the positive from this, and what did I learn from it? And they actually become better and stronger people. So going back to what you mentioned in the metaverse, it's going to be harder to make these assessments towards each other, because I'm talking to you guys right now. Even though we're on technology, we're using these cameras just to be able to view each other visually and through audio, but we still are who we are. But whenever you go into the metaverse, you don't know who you're meeting, especially once these graphics get better and better and better. It is going to be like the Matrix, where we're not going to be able to distinguish between physical reality and digital reality. And they're actually coming out with technology where you can put on these gloves and you can actually feel, or at least trick your brain into feeling, this digital object that you're visually seeing, and trick your brain into thinking it's real. What is that syndrome called, where someone loses a limb?
Phantom limb
pain.
syndrome. Yeah, phantom limb syndrome, when you get phantom pain in the...
Exactly. Mm-hmm. So what if we could reverse engineer that to where someone who loses a limb can still feel that pain, and as if that limb's there, because they have so many neural pathways that have developed to sense that limb being there for so long. You can't just shut it off just like that. So what's going to happen is we're going to be spending so much time in the metaverse that our brains, our neural pathways, all that is going to get so jumbled up that we're not going to be able to tell the real world from the fake world. So to tie in all of this, I think that the metaverse is sort of how the world ends, not with a bang, but with a whimper, because it opens up all these possibilities. And I'll talk about a little bit of the good parts. So going into the metaverse and talking with your cousin who lives in another country might be cool. There are going to be entertainment values. There are going to be, great things about it, but it's going to open up opportunities for hackers, social manipulation, and especially once we get in this Neurolink, we're going to be hacking people's brains literally, and we're going to be able to do that with a click of a mouse. And I say that metaphorically because we won't be clicking mouses anymore. It'll all be done with this. I mean, so it really is a scary thing, and it brings me back to what the artist formerly known as Prince said in an MTV interview back in, I think, like 1999. But he was asked about, what do you think about the internet? And he said, I fear that people are, right now, they're using the internet to escape reality. But now we're shifting into this society that we go outside to take a break from the internet. And that's a scary proposition for me, to where the real world becomes a vacation from the digital world, because the digital world is making up the bulk of our existence. And that percentage is going to get wider and wider and wider until it's going to be like that movie, the Surrogates with Bruce Willis, where you're just basically in this digital world for 23 hours a day, and you only get up to take a shower and use the bathroom, but everything else you're basically being fed intravenously or digitally, and your body doesn't even matter anymore. And
yeah, but I think all media in whatever form has always been really about escapism. I mean, even books, were
It's
about
true.
escapism, identifying with a character, a scenario, putting yourself in that situation. And certainly people regard, good character development is a character you can relate to and imagine yourself within that story. But I know you mentioned Neurolink a couple of times. When you kind of get past all the controversy surrounding that, I mean, Elon Musk's main aim with Neurolink was supposed to be helping people who are paraplegic, people who had strokes, paralyzed different parts of their body, so that they could actually have this phantom limb syndrome. They could actually feel something which normally they couldn't feel. And, in terms of it being connected to the internet, again, it's very difficult. Not everybody's like Stephen Hawking when he was alive, being able to drive around in this motorized robot wheelchair, being able to speak to text. People being able to actually find information, whereas before they were reliant on somebody else doing it for them in a manual process, again, is going to be a great leap. And once everybody is in the metaverse, you don't know if somebody, happens to be in a wheelchair in real life. You don't know if somebody happens to be 98 years old. And I do like that freedom aspect of it. You can be who you want because, we present masks in society in the real world anyway. We try and convince people that, we try and make people think, we're this, that, and the other, when in reality it's an exaggerated, well, not even a self-perception, because you wouldn't wear a mask if, you really saw yourself that way. But, I think the metaverse can be a good thing, but obviously it's going to be exploited. You talked about hackers. I wouldn't worry so much about hackers. It's more the Mark Zuckerbergs who can control the entire narrative within the metaverse, which concern me, because, again, the same thing, you're prone to hackers now online. I don't think that's going to necessarily increase because you're in the metaverse. I think what's going to happen is you are going to trust your environment a lot more because you're going to be distracted by all the bright lights and whistles. And it's going to be a lot easier for you to get sucked in because, I'm not dissatisfied with my life, but if I had the choice to go into a really good metaverse and do something I didn't normally do for 2 or 3 hours, I'd probably go do it. But the problem is that 2 or 3 hours is going to turn into 4 hours, and it's going to turn into me doing it 5 and 6 days a week instead of a couple of days a week, till fast forward a year and I'm just getting in social security checks because I've feigned a bad back injury and I'm in the metaverse laying on my back for 14 hours a day. I think that's where it's going to go seriously wrong, the addiction, because normal social media already has addiction issues. The metaverse is going to be that on steroids.
Yeah, and I'm glad that you mentioned this because I'm not anti-technology and I'm not anti-entertainment. I don't want to live in a society like North Korea where it's just you wake up and you work and everything is about being productivity. We do need a certain amount of escapism. I remember Stan Lee, the creator of Spider-Man and so many other great comics. He was giving an interview where he went to a high school reunion and he was talking about how he had met some old classmates who were bragging about, I'm a lawyer, I'm a doctor, I'm doing all these great things. What are you doing these days? And he's like, I'm a comic book artist. And they're like, haha, they kind of laughed. But then 10 years later, he went to that same high school reunion, met up with his old buddy who was a lawyer, but now he's divorced. And he said, Stan, I got to tell you something. Reading your comic books after a long day of work, it's the escape that I need to forget all of the problems in my life. And it gives me a break from reality and it allows me to relax. And I'm so grateful for your comic books. So entertainment is an important part of life. I enjoy reading books. I like going on social media, and even if the metaverse, comes out in the near future, and VR sets become super cheap, I mean, I'm probably going to go on there too and check it out and have a little bit of fun. But you also brought up addiction, and that addiction and being able to keep intact our frontal lobe and being able to do cost benefit analysis. We have to be very conscious to keep all of that intact. Of the metaverse is a tool. My cell phone is a tool. Comic books. I actually have a few over here. Comic books, all this entertainment. It has to be something that enhances our life, not something that replaces our life. And that's why a lot of people, watch pornography. They're like, man, this beautiful model looks way hotter than my wife. I'm going to go look at this thing more. But you've got to realize that it's not real. It's not real. And that distinction, using that logic that's right here, is what's going to help us get through this or not get through this. But once we take that frontal lobe and we throw it out the window, and we just sort of give in to that dopamine release, and we get addicted to that, then that's when we just completely fall to the wayside, and the whole matrix scenario happens. Is because dopamine is a very powerful drug. Certain activities release certain amounts of it. I think that you need like 10 milligrams of dopamine just to have enough motivation to get up out of bed in the morning. When you smoke a cigarette, I think it brings you like around, like 110. Having sex is around 100 milligrams of dopamine. Drinking a beer can bring it up to as high as 200. Heroin is around 1,100 milligrams of dopamine. So you can imagine how much people get addicted to that substance, because there's nothing naturally we can do. We can have sex and eat a great meal, and that might bring us around 200 or 300 milligrams of dopamine. But there's nothing that we can naturally do within our own bodies to compete with all these artificial things. Scrolling on social media, that's releasing small hits of dopamine constantly. Which brings me to my next point: the thumbs down icon being removed from Facebook. They say, or not from Facebook, but YouTube rather. They say that they removed the dislike button to protect small creators from being bullied or harassed. But in reality, it's another way to keep that dopamine intact. If everybody gets a like, everybody feels like a winner, and it keeps you plugged into that system, because they make more money by keeping you reeled in. Now, again, I'm not anti entertainment. Obviously, I'm on this podcast right now, but the way that I do cost benefit analysis on when should I plug into entertainment and when I should plug out, go into things consciously, saying, what's going to be the benefit? I had a rough day. I'm going to drink 1 or 2 beers. It's going to relax me. But at what point does that benefit turn into a harm? And that's why we should consume entertainment and media with that sort of cost benefit analysis and that risk assessment that comes with, any choices that you make in life. So remain conscious.
Yeah. Now you mentioned
that's my message.
Yeah. Now you mentioned YouTube and the down thumbs thing. There's some pretty good theories running around why they removed the count. I mean, you can see there's been a down mark against it, but you can't see the number. You can just see the number of likes, and it was because politically there were so many videos being disagreed with, and it was going against the official narrative that they didn't want people. It's a very Marxist type practice, actually. Well, it makes you feel like you don't know how many people out there like you there are. And so you feel like, crap, am I a conspiracy theorist? Am I the only one who disagrees with this? When in fact, it might be 2 million people, but there's just one blacked out thumb. And then it's got, 22,000 likes. And you think, crap, there's 22,000 people who agree with this, and I don't. I must be the one who's wrong. Where in reality, like I said, there might be over 2 million people who disagree with it. So it's a very Marxist tactic to actually get rid of any type of dissent. And given Google's practices, antitrust practices and everything in court, their obvious political bias, I think that absolutely is the reason they got rid of those down thumbs, especially when the whole Let's Go Brandon thing came out. People going through and just basically trolling, just like, many people on the left were when, Trump had videos on YouTube. But when the boot was on the other foot, Google decided to do something about it and make sure that you couldn't see the level of dissent or dissatisfaction. So, when a news station like CNN, and I'm sorry for using the word news there, says that, Joe Biden's got an approval rating of 117%, normally you could look on social media and be like, well, why is he getting flamed to crap on here?
I'm just waiting for, the missiles to come in from.
Oh, sorry, I've got an Iron Dome.
CNN and YouTube.
Yeah.
And,
I don't think.
Yeah, they're.
I don't think CNN can afford them anymore, because I think they're down to like about 10% of what their listenership, of viewership was.
It's kind of a shame.
Yeah,
it really is.
Well, it is that there's still 10% audience left.
Well, no, it's honestly a shame that we don't know what to believe anymore.
Right.
This country was founded on freedom of the press. Right. Mm-hmm. And we didn't want the government getting in the way of the press. We wanted the press to be able to say, hey, here's what's really going on. But now we're getting into this. The government really isn't getting in the way, but big money is. And so that's not against the Constitution. Right? The Constitution says, well, the government can't get involved. They're not, but big money is. So I
don't know about that.
Well, you can buy a newspaper.
Yeah.
And you can put what you want out there. You can sponsor a news organization. You can sponsor
like we talked about a few episodes ago, Pfizer, sponsoring all the news networks.
Yeah,
so
Joe Rogan,
brought to you by Pfizer.
Yeah, Joe Rogan's talked about this. He's like, okay, well, you watch a CNN pod or a CNN program, and they say, brought to you by Pfizer or whatever, and you have what's his name from Amazon, Jeff Bezos. Uh-huh. He owns the Washington Post, so he can basically control what the Washington Post puts out there. If some reporter from the Washington Post says, hey, I've got this great article about this, and it might go against Amazon, Jeff Bezos can say, no, let's not put that out there. That's bad. That's bad for business. So you take a regular guy like me, and I'm sitting here saying, where am I supposed to get my news from? I thought we had freedom of the press. Now I don't know what to believe. And that's scary.
Well, I think the big thing is, unless you do have time to check, the facts in certain articles, I don't care what the source is.
Who has that time?
You should always have that skepticism. I don't care if, you're far left or you're far right. If you're not checking what's being fed to you, then, you're responsible for your own, misinformation in that
respect. Fair enough. But let's be honest. I remember my dad telling me about Walter Cronkite. Everybody heard what Walter Cronkite had to say. They believed what he said. He was not on one side or the other. He's like, here's what happened. I'm telling you what happened. And then you figure out how you want to digest this information.
Yeah.
Now it's, here's kind of what happened, but this is how you should feel about what happened. That's news.
Yeah. Now, in relation to you, Randell, I mean, you mentioned off air that you were working on a COVID case at the moment about a vaccine injury case. Now, obviously, you're going to have to fight against the whole MSM narrative, against, this official line that the vaccines are safe. Let's forget the efficacy thing, because that thing's dwindling so fast. It's going to be in the negatives soon. But the safety aspect of it, we've discussed with a few doctors on the show about the instances, rises in myocarditis in kids, basically, going from an average of 800 a year to last year, it was 17,000 plus after the rollout of the vaccines. What what in your particular case that you're working on at the moment is your big barrier? Are you going to be hitting heads with people who have a financial incentive to beat you?
Well, I actually want to go into that, but you guys covered a lot there. I wanted to chime in on, especially about the media stuff. I agree with everything that Max said, but there is some government involvement. Look up Operation Mockingbird.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, 1972 CIA program introduced, about controlling the media. In fact, what was his name? The dude Anderson on CNN, his mother who actually worked for the CIA in that program.
I mean, so, Operation Mockingbird, they go to news stations and say, hey, we want you guys to, show support, for, this particular, war to, drive recruitment numbers or this or that. I mean, and it's all unclassified stuff. So it's not like I'm leaking anything. I mean, it's out there, freedom of information. And it was the great former governor of Minnesota, Jesse Ventura, who said, very wisely, that the media was supposed to be the extra branch of government, the unnamed branch of government that holds everything in balance. Like we have the judicial branch, the executive branch, all that.
Well, it's called the fourth estate, isn't it? The fourth estate.
Well, but a lot of that came from escaping from all of the religious tyranny, but also press tyranny of telling everybody, here's what's really happening, here's what you need to believe. And then you had the religious aspect of saying, and by the way, the religious aspect is controlling everything. So that's where we created our country. Mm-hmm. And now all of a sudden we're reverting back to what we escaped from.
It goes back to what you guys were saying earlier about like not having time to research things. I mean, most of us, I think, do. Most of us are on social media for at least an hour a day. That's an hour that you could be using to investigate things. But here's the problem is looking up CDC data doesn't give you a dopamine hit. It's not exciting. It's not fun. And you're like, let somebody else do that shit. Let me go play video games. Like, I'm not supposed to be a journalist. But it comes down to self-responsibility, especially when it comes to things like, am I going to inject a vaccine in my body? Am I going to, vote for this particular person? It has real consequences. So it may not be fun. It may not give you that dopamine hit. But if you care about your family and your future, you got to put away the comic books and the video games and the social media, and you've got to fact check the fact checkers. I'm not saying that you have to be this full-blown private investigator citizen journalist, but if you don't want to be screwed over, you can't be naive in society. You just won $10 million, and then suddenly the supermodel is knocking on your door and she says she's interested in dating you. You might want to question her,
No, no, not at all. No, I wouldn't question her. I'd be okay with that.
I mean, and then going back to what you were talking about, Tristan, you were talking about psychological warfare and how things are marketed. It was, what is his name? Albert Bourla, the CEO of Pfizer. I watched one of his recent interviews, and he was talking about quote unquote anti-vaxxers. And I'm going to dissect that term because it's a very misnomer, sort of destructive term. But he was saying that there are people who are skeptical against the vaccine, and they're profiting from the fear around side effects, and they're selling nutritional supplements, and how dare they profit from fear. And I'm like, that's literally what Pfizer and Moderna are profiting off of is fear, because most people who are just sitting in their house, just watching CNN, Fox News, all these, mainstream media outlets, especially CNN, they're watching it all day, and they're literally being told with a death count that's on the screen, 10,000 people died today of COVID. All these people are dying, And if you just look at these little segments, you're literally looking at COVID as if it's, the Ebola virus. And if you get it, you're going to drop like a fly and die. I need to go get vaccinated now. When in reality, if you're not overweight, if you're under the age of 50, if you're not a smoker, if you don't abuse alcohol, if you get 5,000 international units of vitamin D per day, if you're doing these healthy things and you don't fall into these high risk categories, your chances of dying from COVID are less than 1%.
Well, even the CDC came out this week and admitted that 80% of the deaths recorded in hospitals saying from COVID were just with COVID and the causes were something else. And they said the same thing a couple of weeks ago about admissions to hospital, that people being admitted to hospital with COVID, it wasn't because of COVID, they just happened to have COVID. And, when you've got the average death, the average mortality in the United States is 78 years old, but the average age of death from COVID is 82. You think some people might be able to do a little bit of math and kind of figure out, well, can we really count people above the age of 78 because they were going to die from something or other, whether it be COVID, tripping over and banging their head, displacing a hip and falling in front of a car, or a bad cold in winter? I mean, I don't think those people should be statistically relevant because they've ignored the fact that you stand over 170 times of being kidnapped and sold into sex trafficking as an under 14-year-old than you have of dying with COVID.
Well, and just notice that you said last week, the CDC, I'm going to say that again. Last week, the CDC admits that, the majority of people dying from COVID have all these comorbidities. These are things that I was looking into a year ago, and I was saying this, and people were, calling me crazy. But now people that bought into it are now starting to question, should I get that fourth shot? I mean, in Turkey, they just authorized a fifth shot. Well, let's look at Moderna's stock. In 2018, it was down here. I mean, go on Google, type in Moderna stock. In 2018, it was down here. Now it's way up here, 1,200% growth. If we just scare people into taking this, every 6 months we come out with a new booster. Who's going to pay for these boosters? They keep saying that they're free and the government's paying for it. Where's the government getting their money? Oh yeah, the taxpayers, we're paying for the free shot. So it's a built-in sort of subscription, if you will. These magazine companies or Netflix, they thrive on subscriptions because it's guaranteed money to come in every month. So you're not getting a COVID vaccine, you're getting a COVID vaccine subscription that you're going to have to get every 6 months. And it's very nefarious, but it looks like you're wanting to mention something.
Yeah, I was just going to read you this article. You reminded me.
Yeah, but before you do that, as you're bringing that up, I remember my father when this whole mess happened, and nobody knew what the hell was going on. This is March 2020, right? So I go over to my dad's house. And at this time, my dad is 82, 83 years old. And my dad can drink me under a table, smoked 5 packs of cigarettes a day until like 1979, everything. And he looked at me and he said, Max, if you're afraid to be close to me right now to give me some made up virus, I'm good. I've lived a pretty dang good life, and if this is what's going to end me, then I'm good with that. I'm not going to go out and I'm not going to mess with all this crap. If this is what's going to end me, I'm good with that. But apparently, we have a lot of people that, like you say, in the 70s range or 80s range as far as age, they're not good with that. They want to go ahead and get these, vaccines and all that stuff.
Yeah.
But I remember my dad saying that, and I'm like, you know what? It makes a lot of sense that this old man, which by the way has COPD because he did smoke 5 packs of Marlboro Reds a day when he was a air traffic controller, quit smoking and drank a lot, could drink me under a table and I drink a lot or whatever, and then just said, well, if this is what takes me, fair enough. You know, if this little virus swimming around all of a sudden takes me after he lived a hell of a life compared to you and I put together, we didn't live the life he did.
Yeah. And Randall, you said earlier that one of the biggest questions you can ask is why. And my whole approach to this so-called pandemic has been, you know, the 3 largest killers in the United States: heart disease, cancer, medical malpractice. And most of those medical malpractice cases are either kind of oversubscription or incorrect prescription of drugs.
Or British doctors.
But to treat people with obesity, right? And so cancer and heart disease, 2 of the largest causes of those are obesity. CDC came out and said, yep, and CNN actually reported on this for once, that if you are obese, your chances of hospitalization and death from COVID are increased, you know, off the scale. And yet here we are approaching 2 years into this pandemic, and no TV show, pretty much none of the media will mention the fact that if you are fat, you stand a higher chance of dying of COVID. So lose some weight, you fat shit. And that should be a message, whether you want to avoid cancer, heart disease, going in front of a doctor, which might end up in medical malpractice in the first place, lose some weight. Yeah, it seems to be almost illegal to bring health into the equation.
Yeah, but if you tell me I'm fat, I'm offended.
Well, yeah, and that's the problem. You can't
seriously,
offend people.
if you tell me I'm fat, I'm offended. And so
it's fat phobia, fat shaming.
That's wrong, right? So maybe that's
no, because there are prettier words. Because if you can convince people to now get ready to take a 4th booster, if you could have said, you know what, maybe let's look. You know, I mean, obviously BMI index for the most part is crap, right? But on the extremes, it's pretty reliable. If somebody's kind of like 90% made up of fat, then it's probably a decent, you know, indicator that there might be an issue. Okay. But, you know, it seems almost illegal to bring up the fact, look, if you have comorbidities, your chances of dying are so much higher. And if you remove the people who had comorbidities, the death rate is, there's 5 zeros before another number appears after the decimal point. And yet,
the price of Shiba Inu.
Yeah. So when I look at all those things and I think of why are they pushing this vaccine so hard, yet won't push a promotion of better health or lifestyle, then I believe the whole thing's BS. Because if you're not getting rid or attacking the one thing which is responsible for the majority of the deaths in terms of comorbidity, yet you won't mention it, then you're peddling bullshit as far as I'm concerned.
Well, I want to present some imaginary scenarios to you. So according to the...
we love these.
We love those. We thrive on imaginary scenarios.
I'll give you several here. So according to the CDC, around 11 people a day drown in the United States. So imagine if I'm a millionaire and I go to, CNN, all these different places, and I'm selling a product, a guardrail that goes around bathtubs and swimming pools, and it senses the level of water. I go to all these different news stations and I say, I want you to start putting the death count for people that drown every day on all of your news stations. And I want you to do at least 3 stories a day about people drowning. Well, all of a sudden, people are really freaked out about drowning all of a sudden. And everyone's looking to go buy my product now because they feel that they need it. And even wordplay, they don't call it the coronavirus. They call it the coronavirus disease. That makes it sound a lot scarier. It's a disease. I mean, imagine this. You go to the doctor and they say, Tristan, you have a small amount of brain cancer, but here's the good news. There's a 99.3% chance that you're going to be just fine, and it's looking like it's going into remission. But just in case, we want to give you some chemotherapy, and if it harms you in any way, we're legally immune. Would you take that chance of getting the chemotherapy? You seem like a bright guy. I'm going to guess that what would you do in that scenario?
Well, no, I obviously wouldn't take it. I mean, I believe in statistics. If we were
Yeah,
talking
but
50-50, I probably still would not.
He
have
might
the
believe
chemotherapy.
that though, because we all know the British people have problems in their head. So maybe he might say, "Well, it's this problem that I'm British, so yeah, I might need to take this medicine."
And another thing with everything's about marketing, even in dating. Whenever you go on your first date, you're not just going to put on, just a shirt with a bunch of holes in it. You're going to take a shower, put on some cologne, put your best foot forward. It's all a marketing strategy, psychological.
Look at you trying to, put your best foot forward. I'm going to just grab whatever t-shirt is off the top of the drawer.
Well, and again, going back to this whole coronavirus, vaccine thing, since when have you ever gone to the doctor and you go in, for example, like when I was a little kid, I broke my arm, not that serious, just needed a cast, whatever. But could you imagine going to the doctor and you have, let's just say, a runny nose, and they come up to you and say, I've got some bad news. You have a deadly cold. There's only a 99.5% chance of survival of this. It's very deadly. I've never heard of something becoming deadly that has that high of a survival rate. Now, if I was to have a gunshot wound or I got into a car accident and I was told that, I have a 10% chance of living, then yeah, that's a deadly situation. So a lot of people have asked me, under what scenario would you take the vaccine? And I said, well, if I, contracted HIV and it got really bad and my immune system became so compromised, I'd be looking for any way to boost it. So if you're someone who has, stage 4 cancer, or, you have HIV or diabetes that has been untreated, for years and years and years, maybe you're willing to take that chance and get vaccinated and get that little small bump of immunity that lasts for, I think, approximately 10 weeks, and then it starts to wane. Or let's say that a new variant came out and it had, let's say, a 50% fatality rate for people even with no comorbidities. Then I might be freaking out saying, man, even with no comorbidities, if I get this virus, this new variant, and I have a 50-50 chance of dying, yeah, I'll probably go get vaccinated. But you're telling me that I have no comorbidities, that I'm a healthy guy. I've already had COVID supposedly twice. I've tested positive for it, and I got over it within a couple of days. So I probably have some natural antibodies. And then you're telling me to go get vaccinated, but in the rare chance that I develop a blood clot or a heart attack, the vaccine company has legal immunity and doesn't have to pay for any of my medical costs to recover from that side effect or death. I think I'm going to just stick with my natural immunity.
Right. So now let's add one more wrinkle, because you work for yourself, right? So now your employer says you have to go get this vaccine so we can cut you a paycheck to support your family. Now, how do you feel?
Well, good news. The Supreme Court just blocked that mandate today for private workers, unless you're a nurse or you're a federal worker. So this podcast is very pertinent today. So congratulations.
Yeah. Now, a really shitty thing Biden said after that Supreme Court ruling was, well, I'm disappointed, but I hope the states will make their own decisions. So basically completely ignore the Supreme Court ruling and go with what
fair
I
enough.
want.
But you know what? There were a lot of people that they got faced with, I have to get a vaccine. I have to do this. Because I have bills to pay. I have a family to support. You know, I've got a wife. I've got kids at home. And my job is saying I have to have this vaccine to be able to come to work or even remotely do my work or do whatever. And, I mean, I'm thinking about myself. I'm saying, well, my job says I've got to get this jab in my arm, and I'm not afraid of that. So go ahead and stick me in the arm. I don't care, because I want to make sure my family has food. I want to make sure they have a roof over their head. How terrible is that?
It's absolutely horrendous that on one hand, we're telling people that abortion is my body, my choice. And there's literally potential for, you know, human life to thrive in that situation. And we could go down a whole rabbit hole about, you know, the ethics of abortion. But then that argument, according to, you know, the left wing, cannot be applied to this, where it's like my body, my choice. And then to make matters worse, they have legal immunity and there's no exemptions. So what about people that are being told by their doctors, hey, you have a really bad heart condition, we don't recommend you to get vaccinated? So what about the people who want to get vaccinated, but their doctors are telling them, hey, you can't get vaccinated because you have an immune disorder where your body's going to reject the vaccine? And there are people in that situation, and they get lumped in with all of the people who are supposedly anti-vax. And I wanted to dissect that word a little bit before I forget. Am I anti-vax even though I'm a strong supporter of the polio vaccine? I think that the polio vaccine is one of the, you know, greatest inventions ever, and I've taken it, and I encourage other people to take it. But I haven't taken the COVID vaccine, but I'm still an anti-vaxxer. And I've told people that, and I'm not a doctor, by the way, so I'm not giving any medical advice, it's just personal opinions, but I even just said a few minutes ago on this very podcast that if you're someone who has HIV, if you're someone who basically doesn't have an immune system for, you know, whatever health complications that you have, it's been shown over and over that, you know, these vaccines do give you some sort of comparable boost of immunity that lasts for about, you know, 10 weeks, and then it starts to, you know, wane. So if you're in a situation where your immune system is severely compromised and you might die anyways, then hey, yeah, you know, go take the vaccine and get your boost in immunity, whatever. So I'm not even saying that we should ban the vaccine or nobody at all should take it. But at the same time, we also look at like the polio vaccine and some of these more established vaccines. They didn't get released for years, and we had long-term studies on this. And then also on top of it, the COVID vaccine is not a traditional vaccine. It's not like they're putting an inactive virus in your body. I mean, it really is like gene therapy. They're taking a copy of a copy of a copy of a protein that's synthesized, and then they're injecting it into you. So there's all kinds of problems that are surrounded with this.
I've got one more thing.
The final point that I want to make, and you know, you guys can chime in. Is
we screwed up. Hey, we were trying to communicate what we were finishing up. So.
We've been trying to learn sign language so we can kind of communicate off camera, but so far
we're terrible.
So far we've got to, I would like food, I need potty, past that. So it hasn't really been that helpful, I'll be honest with you.
Yeah, it's our fault.
But sorry, Randall, before you continue there, you have to remember the label anti-vax is to demonize people who disagree with an agenda. It's just like being accused of being racist because you disagree with being, because you disagree with this voting rights
Well,
legislation
yeah,
they're trying to push through.
I don't like British people, even though that's where my family comes from. Yeah.
But the voting right legislation, I mean, my thing which I support is show an ID to vote. You've got to show an ID. You've got to, if you're going to have a vaccine card and stuff to eat in restaurants in these same states, they don't want you to have an ID card to vote. And I don't care if you're white, black, Asian, whatever. Have an ID to vote. That's all. I don't care even who you vote for after that. As a conservative, I can honestly say, if every single person in this country who's eligible to vote has an ID card and they vote, and conservatives get absolutely the floor wiped, like barely any votes whatsoever, I don't care as long as it was a legitimate election. So I really don't care who they vote for. I just want it to be a legitimate vote.
Yeah, and how can you argue with that, and to assume that the argument that voter ID laws are racist is, I believe it was a reporter, I can't remember his name, but you could Google it or look it up on YouTube, about what do liberals really think about black voters. And this guy went all around Brooklyn and Harlem asking black people, do you have ID? Do you know how to get ID? And they're like, yeah. So it's actually quite racist to assume that minorities are, some of the arguments are, they're not smart enough to use the internet. They don't know where the ID centers are, the driver's license stations, to get these things. They're unaffordable. In my state, it costs $9 to get an ID. So
that's cheap compared to Texas. It's 16 in Texas.
So to get beer, to get cigarettes, I mean, we use ID for everything. To say that it's racist to ask someone to verify they are who they say they are, to help put someone in a position of power that has executive authority over our entire military. Voting is not just a privilege, it's a responsibility. And I've made the controversial statement that in some ways I would almost support a basic knowledge test of the Constitution before people would be allowed to vote. But of course that comes with all kinds of problems, and who would make the test and who would it be geared towards. But you understand my sentiment is that even me, whenever I ran for public office, I actually got kind of depressed, because the more that I talked about in-depth sort of detailed issues and detailed plans, people were falling asleep. But if I just said, well, lower taxes, legalize, medical marijuana, as long as I kept things bumper sticker short, people could cheer for it. But the average voter is getting dumber, is what I'm trying to say, is that the average voter is becoming dumber, and candidates and companies and everyone is sort of, dumbing themselves down. And as a result, as we set the bar lower in society, everybody gets a participation trophy. You have to be afraid of a virus with a 99.5% survival rate. You can't drink from water hoses anymore because it might cause cancer. We are making society dumber and weaker and afraid of everything because we're being coddled. You guys are a little bit older than me, but even in my generation, and I'm
a lot
sure
older than you.
I'm sure that you guys can relate. But I remember growing up, my dad had this, pickup truck, and we'd all jump in the back, and he'd drive us around, wherever, and we'd all just hop in the back. No seat belts, nothing. We're drinking from water hoses. We're, getting our knees scraped up. But it's just like everyone now is just so afraid of everything. They're constantly being told, that's bad for you, that's bad for you, this, and this. Let people take damn risk. To be able to have the freedom to take risk and to suffer consequences is how we grow, how we get stronger. But it's almost like people are begging the government to take the reins of everything. We want to be safe. We don't want to be free. Well, you can lock yourself in a room and just order Uber Eats for the rest of your life and never get out into the real world. And yeah, you might live longer. but did you really live, or did you just put yourself in a self-imposed prison?
Yeah, no, Randall, before Max asks his last question, I just wanted to make a comment about the voting rights. I think it was since 2007 or 2008, the amount of money spent by the left in campaigns and through bills allocating to oppose voter ID, you could have got an ID card for every member of the United States 31 times over.
Amen.
With the money they've spent on trying to go against people getting ID cards. You could have bought an ID card for everybody and ongoing for like the next 150 years, completely been free.
Yeah. And guess what, Randall? I'm going to give you just a quick comment like he did. And then we're going to close this out and let you tell everybody where they can find more information about you. But you talked about the polio vaccine. And you're younger than us. I'm not quite sure if you had the chickenpox vaccine. So
I didn't have that. I just got it the old-fashioned way.
Yeah. Okay. So you're kind of in between. Immunity. But what brand of polio vaccine did you have?
It's a good question. I don't know. I was a kid, so I have no idea.
Yeah. Well, guess what? If you had it today, would you know what brand of polio vaccine, what brand of chickenpox vaccine you had?
Yeah, absolutely.
Randall, I have 4 kids, and I remember when I took my kids to the pediatrician and we're putting them through all the vaccines. I never said, what brand of chickenpox vaccine is this? You know, is this Pfizer? Is this Moderna? Is this Johnson & Johnson? And now all of a sudden we have brands of vaccines.
Well, that's partly because polio vaccine worked, though. Here you've got a choice between shitty, and shittier.
Yeah, but you never thought about what brand of vaccine. I never asked my kid's pediatrician, what brand vaccine are they getting? Why are we not talking about the fact that there's brands of vaccines? When I took vaccines when I was a kid, I took my kids to the pediatricians and gave them vaccines. I never said, hey, Dr. Ascari, what brand vaccine are you giving them? The doc just said, it's time for this vaccine. I never said, well, what brand? Oh, well, you have a choice between this, and this. Should we be worried about the fact that now all of a sudden, and let's just take all the conspiracy theory, all the bullshit away. Why are we worried about the vaccines? Because now there's multiple versions and we all talk about the brand of the vaccine.
Well, that goes to a free market argument, and I'm actually in support of that. I don't want there to be a state sort of, universal vaccine that is produced just by one single entity. I'm glad that there's multiple brands and that there's multiple companies doing these things, and competition.
But are you though? Because you could see it if Pfizer and Moderna had a vaccine for polio, and the Pfizer vaccine is $200 and the Moderna vaccine is $20. Me being cheap, I'd say, well, let's do the Moderna, right? And I don't know. I'm not a doctor. So now we're getting to the point to where we're talking about money.
Oh, yeah. And that's always going to be an issue whenever you have, again, going back, what's the motive? We should always be, skeptical of what motives are behind everything that people are doing without going into paranoia. But look at Johnson and Johnson. No one's getting the Johnson and Johnson vaccine right now. Well, I don't want to say nobody, but the
I
amount of
did.
people getting it.
I did because I'm not cheap.
Yeah.
I just wanted one shot.
I can hear his blood clotting under the table in his legs right now.
Wait, hang on.
But that vaccine got the most sort of negative feedback in terms of side effects, and it's almost not even in the conversation anymore. Everyone's just asking, oh, did you get Pfizer or Moderna? No one's even talking about Johnson and Johnson anymore. So the free market is a good thing, to where we do have choices and they can compete for efficacy and effectiveness and all these kind of things. But you are right. It does bring up a separate argument of, as long as there's a profit motive, just like with private prisons.
Yeah, I hit the wrong button. Sorry. Keep going.
I was just going to say that yes, and maybe this is one of the criticisms of capitalism. I'm not a socialist or anything. I think capitalism is a much better choice, but nothing's perfect either. And as long as we have profit motives, just like with private prisons, those private prisons don't survive without warm bodies coming in. How do we get these warm bodies coming in? We have to lobby to keep certain things illegal, like marijuana, so that we can generate more prisoners, so that we can get those contracts from the state, so on and so forth. But it all circles back around to what we were talking about earlier with, don't be a dopamine junkie. Don't just feed into your desires and entertainment. Use that frontal lobe here of logic and say, hey, I'm going to put an hour aside, and before I inject something into my body, before I buy this product, before I eat this food, before I marry this woman or this man, I'm going to do a little bit of digging so that I can get some details and choose what I think is going to be best for my budget, for my mental health, for my physical health, and then make an informed decision, and not just buying into things because the herd is doing it. Simple as that.
Makes sense. I apologize for hitting the wrong button, by the way. I was trying to get everything situated for the end of the podcast, and then I hit the button too quick.
Lobster claw. He kind of hits buttons.
Yeah,
like
well,
that, along with being colorblind, doesn't help.
Yeah, well, the colorblindness doesn't help. The fact that this mouse sucks, and I just tried to get everything squared away so we could have a nice end to the podcast. But yeah, once again, I screwed that up.
Before we go to an outro, I just want to sneak this in really quick. Is really important.
Absolutely.
What you guys were talking about, before we forget, is yes, I have been working with some people who have been injured by the vaccine, and even some who have died. Even though these, and this is where my love of the legal system and doing some, paralegal type stuff, fighting through the courts, even though I'm sort of more geared into investigations right now, everyone should learn about the legal system. That's why I wrote the book called Learn the Law in 7 Days. It's like a little 100-page book. Probably take you a week to get through it if you read it slowly and consciously. Everyone needs to have a basic legal knowledge, because the legal system controls everything that we do. Even this ink pen that I'm holding, some regulator had to make a law about how this thing could get ethically built and distributed. But if you have been injured, or someone in your family has been killed after taking any vaccine, whether it's a COVID vaccine or a polio vaccine, whatever, even though Pfizer and Moderna, all these companies have legal immunity right now, there is a way that you can get compensated, and that's through the countermeasure injury program that's sponsored by the government. And they pay up to a $400,000 death benefit if you can prove that the vaccine, not just the vaccine, but treatments regarding COVID contributed to your death, just like the ventilators. The ventilators are something that is not getting enough attention. because now data is coming out showing that a lot of people were put on ventilators way too early, and it caused their lungs to get weak because they became dependent upon these machines. And the numbers are showing that if you got put on a ventilator, statistically is pretty much a death sentence. You weren't going to make it. And these departments were trying to justify their budgets by using up all this equipment. We got to get everybody on a ventilator. We have to get everybody, fitted with these things so that we can write it on our budget list and get that FEMA money, get that, those federal dollars. We have to use the product to justify increasing the budget, get those kickbacks, all those things. But getting back on topic, if you have been injured by any sort of treatments regarding COVID or the vaccine, just Google this: countermeasure injury program COVID, and it will bring you to a government website, and you can download their packet. It's really thick, And if you need help filling it out, I can't give you legal advice. I'm not an attorney or anything, but there are law firms that are helping people fill this out, for free. And that is an avenue that you should be exploring. And notice that they're not promoting the countermeasure injury program on any news station. Only 400 people in the United States have been granted any of this money from this program. And it's something that needs to be promoted more often, because if these vaccines have absolutely zero risk, then why does such a program even exist to begin with? Makes you think.
Brian, and totally makes us think. Make sure you send us that information so we can put it in the show notes.
Yeah, absolutely. And one more quick tip on that. If you are filling out this package, it's pretty thick. I think it's like, I don't know, 20 pages or something.
I thought you were going to say like 400. Pretty thick, not 20.
Yeah, more like 2 pages.
Right.
I'd probably.
I actually had a friend who passed away during this whole thing when it first started. He was a pretty healthy guy for the most part. He was walking around. Long story short, they put him on a ventilator, way too early. His health went way down. He died, and I helped out that family fill out this packet. And here's the most difficult part: is they want you to order all of the medical records leading up to this event, which could be hundreds, if not thousands of pages. And they have to sift through all that. So going to a lawyer would be your best bet. But I think as of right now, there's only a handful of lawyers that are helping people with countermeasure injury program claims. So if you are going to do it on your own, you've got to think like a lawyer, and you've got to build a case for yourself, and you've got to build a narrative showing that this person was healthy in this timeline, and they were given this treatment, this ventilator, this vaccine, and the timeline shows that their health went way down, and that there's some kind of a correlation. And that's the case with any sort of legal issue, whether it's civil, criminal. You've got to build the narrative in your favor. So if someone goes to the hospital, one of your loved ones, keep a journal. I don't care if it's for COVID. I don't care if it's for tennis elbow surgery. Every time that you go to the doctor, keep a journal of everything, because it can save you legally and financially, all that stuff. Record keeping is a must in this day and age that we live in. And I've saw so many people, don't delete those text messages. Don't forget these details. Whenever you talk to these nurses to check in at 9:50 a.m., I called this hospital. They said this. Keep good notes, and it could very well save your life in the future and help you out.
Great advice. Thank you so much, Randell, for hanging out with us for the last couple hours. Give us that last piece of how people can get a hold of you, find out more information about you, all that good stuff.
Yeah. So another thing I wanted to plug into is that, I really think that a lot of these problems that are in society are stemming from, fatherless homes, lack of morality, lack of belief in a higher power. All this stuff ties in together on why society is falling down. And one of my books, a report that I sent to the UN, Global Human Trafficking in the Family Law Courts, it documents some of the causes of rising divorce rates and how fathers not being in the home are affecting crime. On bookauthority.org, it was listed as one of the top 100 most important books in regards to human rights. And you can get that for free on naliniglobal.org.
Spell that.
But it's NALINI.org. And that book is probably one of my most proudest works. I get emails all the time from people just saying, wow, that really woke me up, because it really illustrates just how important marriage is in the foundation of society. It's the bedrock of our society, and I didn't realize that for a long time, and that could be a whole podcast in and of itself, that topic. But I've written on all kinds of issues. You can just simply Google my name, Randell Stroud, RANDELLSTROUD. I've written on a lot of these topics that we've talked about throughout this podcast, and the books that I've written about law. I've written about martial arts, self-defense, marriage, all these kind of things that basically every red-blooded man should know about: how to protect himself, how to love, and how to defend that love. So just Google my name and go down the rabbit hole of Randell Stroud.
No, we love it. And Randell, by the way, thanks for coming back on the show and talking to us. And obviously you're going to come back and we're going to talk about more stuff. So we certainly appreciate that. Got to apologize. I hit the button there and kind of chop this up. So I'm going to put the video together, and there's going to be this weird part where, kind of at the end that it's like there's a jump, but it is what it is. I'm sorry. Hey, it's been a long day for me, Randell.
We weren't going to blame ourselves, though. In the show notes, we were going to put 1 hour, 48 minutes. Randell had to take a poop, and we couldn't hit the button to stop the recording quick enough. So
yeah, we'll blame it on Randell.
Now,
no,
now
that's
you
fine.
guys, your legal chops are getting better. Never admit fault.
There we go. So, hey, everybody, please check him out. Randell, we love you. We appreciate everything you bring to the show. If you're watching this on YouTube and it's actually still here, please click our little logo down there and subscribe to us. That helps us out. And that will do it for this episode of The Wolf and the Shepherd. And we will catch you on the next one.